Calling to order the May 9th, 2017 Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. The first item that we have is approval of minutes. Because we do not have a quorum, fellow commissioners, we will not be reviewing the March 14, 2017 work session and regular meeting. However, I will entertain if there's been any changes by staff for the April 11, 2017 meeting minutes. Any changes from staff?
No changes.
Okay. Any changes from commission members?
None from me.
I think I just had one minor change on page number 2, line item 25. She received the revisions to the plat from the developer. However, and then there just should be a comma after the word however. Otherwise, that was all my changes. I'll look for a motion to approve the minutes.
Move to approve the minutes with the changes described by Chair Nemeth. Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Alrighty, we'll move on to the next item, which is a public hearing on a variance request for 14791 Blackfoot Street Northwest by Leroy and Sandra Warneka. And I'll look to city staff to provide information to us.
So good evening. So as you said, tonight we do have a public hearing. It's for a variance request located at 14791 Blackfoot Street, excuse me. Here the location is, you go north on 7th Avenue. You can take a right on 147th Lane right here. And here's the property right here. It butts onto Round Lake. So tonight, Mr. Warneka, he did submit this variance request, and it is to reduce the required width of the lots at the front yard setback. Now, the way that this property is governed is that we have the Shoreline Management Code, which is adopted by the city pursuant to Minnesota regulations that apply to all the shorelands and public waters within the state of Minnesota. The city of Andover is the governing body of the code, but as required by the Shoreland Code, the Department of Natural Resources has received notice of the variance request. They received the public hearing notice and the staff report, and at this time they haven't made any comments on the staff report. It is not uncommon for them to not comment on these. We just have to notify them as a courtesy that these variances are being requested. So what's happening on this property is it is, again, located within the shoreland of Round Lake. So the city has two codes. One, we have the shoreline regulations, which states the unsewered single-family lots on recreational development lakes. Round Lake is considered a recreational development lake. This is ID'd by the DNR. Is required to have a minimum of 20,000 square feet with a lot width of 100 feet. I did attach that section of the code for your review. However, the city of Andover also has stricter regulations in the R1 single-family rural district, which supersedes the shoreland regulations. Now, Mr. Warneka submitted a letter for the proposed variance, and here I have it mapped out. Here's his overall property all through here. And what he's requesting is variances to reduce the lot width at the front yard setback. So a little bit how the city code works. Our code requires on the public right-of-way, so on the street, your lot width has to be 50 feet. However, at your setback line where your houses have to be set back, in this area it's 40 feet. So 40 feet back, city code requires the lots to be 300 feet wide in the rural area. What Mr. Warneka is proposing is to grant variances that would allow one lot that would be 150 feet and another lot that would be 180 feet. If these variances were granted, then he would move forward with a lot split, and you would see these. So we would have one lot with 180-foot width and one lot with 150-foot width. So the existing code right now, the lot does meet the code requirements for the lot width, depth, and area. So it meets the acreage, it meets how deep it needs to be, and then the lot width. Again, if the lot is further subdivided, these lots would require variances for that lot width. They would still meet the requirements of lot size and lot depth. So I've also put together a table. See if I can zoom in far enough or close enough. So I have this table put together in the report too. And what this table shows is what is required in the R1 rural area, what is required in the shoreland area, so what the existing lot is, and if he was to split his lot, what those lot requirements or what those lot dimensions would be. So again, here he would need the variance for the lot width at the front yard setback for one lot at 180 feet and the other one at 150 feet. Now also, Mr. Warneka has submitted a letter supporting his variance request, talking about the practical difficulties. As we know, City Code 12-14-7 does outline the criteria when considering a variance. So the Planning Commission and City Council wants to look at these criteria and consider them when answering the questions, is there practical difficulties that would warrant a variance. So the first one is the property owner proposes to use the property in a reasonable manner, not permitted by an official control. And again, Mr. Warneka submitted a letter. I paraphrased some of this. So the proposed lot widths meet the intent and regulations of the city code pertaining to the shoreland management provisions. However, the city has placed stricter provisions on lots zoned rural residential, which limits the further subdivision of this particular property because a lot will not meet the required 300-foot width at the front yard setback. Then also the required lot widths at the public right-of-way is 50 feet. You go back the 40 feet for the lot width at the setback is required to be 300 feet. So the proposed lot width of 150 feet and 180 feet do provide ample access and room to construct a home while leaving enough of a buffer space between the neighboring properties. And the other question is the plight of the property owner due to circumstances unique to the property, not created by the landowner? The property owner did purchase this property, and the lot was created back in July of 1977. It was subdivided in such a way that the lot size and depth exceeded the existing requirements in the rural residential district at that time. However, the lot width of 330 feet does not allow for the further subdivision of the land. And back in 1977, just so you know, lot width was required to be 333 feet or 330 feet. The other one, the variance, if granted, will not alter the essential character of the locality and will not alter the rural residential character. Density requirements in the rural residential district is 2.5 acre minimums per lot. The approval of the variance will allow for the subdivision of the land that will create 2 lots that will be at least 2.5 acres minimum. Further subdivision of the land would be in compliance, again, with the density requirements of the rural area. And then I'll try to do this aerial, I'm not sure. That does work a little bit. So the structure setback from the neighboring properties will be a great enough distance to retain the rural character. So what staff did is actually measured the southern property line of Mr. Warneka's property to the most southern house going this way, and that's 245 feet. And he also has 200 feet between his existing structure and the neighboring structure, so 200 feet between there. One thing that's unique with these properties is the property to the north, this area right in here won't be built on, and that's because it is drainage and utility easement that was dedicated as part of the original plat. The contours, the elevation is a little bit lower in there, so it's the natural floodway for the waters to flow this way and go into the lake, so that buffer will always be in that area. So at this time, the Andover Review Committee, we reviewed this and there was no real particular comments pertaining to this request. City staff has received many phone calls and emails regarding this variance request. Attached to your report is 2 requests. All these requests will become part of the public record. 2 opposing it at 4050 147th Lane, and then there's also a petition from the landowners from the surrounding area in the report. And then also in front of you is a supplemental to the report. These also become part of the staff report and part of the public records. One of them is a response letter from the applicant himself, Mr. Warneka. And then also we were given 3 more letters opposing the variance, one from 4325 149th Avenue, 3940 149th Avenue, and 14821 Blackfoot. So at this time, Planning and Zoning Commission is asked to hold the public hearing for these variance requests. Compare the variance request with the review criteria set out in code, and then also make a recommendation of approval or denial based on findings of fact to the City Council. Staff has drafted resolutions with potential findings of fact that the Commission may want to consider when recommending approval or denial of this request. And Mr. Warneka is here to answer any questions that you may have of him, and it is also a public hearing.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Hanson, for the information. I will turn to my fellow commission members if there's any questions of staff that you'd like to pose at this time. I guess then, as proper, I thought I would let my fellow commission members ask theirs. I do have a couple of, I think one is a comment and one will be a question. So if the variance is approved and the applicant comes forward for the lot split, that lot split would just be an administrative, it wouldn't come back before us as a lot split, correct?
Correct. We do have an administrative lot line that we do in-house here. And part of that, though, is we do look at, and there are requirements that they have to meet. We need to make sure that they have the buildable area that's required, which is 3,600 square feet for the house, and then 10,000 square feet for the primary and secondary septic systems. Soil borings would be required, full surveys with the contours showing how the water is going to drain from the properties, all of that. So we do a thorough analysis within.
Okay. And just a couple other questions in regards to the map that you had up before. Do you know how big each lot will be after they are split?
Well, we do have that in the resolution where the property owner would need to verify the size of those lots. There's been some conflicting information on what this actual lot size is. Let's say, so as part of the condition, if this was to be approved, in order for the lot split to be approved from staff, each of these lots would have to be a minimum of 2.5 acres. And again, that would need to be proved to staff by a certified survey.
Okay. And then my last question, I know you had written to the DNR and asked for comment, and they haven't gotten back to the city. There was a comment in here from a resident regarding the local soil and water conservation district. Are they to review this information?
No, they would not need to. DNR would be the the sole person that would be reviewing this,
Okay.
and city staff.
Okay. That would include the Coon Creek Watershed District, if necessary, correct? They would not have to.
They come in if there's over an acre of land disturbed. So if they're going to disturb more than an acre, then yes, they would review it.
So that would be the case if they did the lot split into the 2.5?
They would not in this case.
Okay. Very good. That was all my questions.
Mr. Chair, your question led to some of my own, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Ms. Hanson, jumping back to that size of the lot, the minimum is 2.5 acres. If we were to approve this variance tonight, we are not approving a variance to go below 2.5 acres of the lot size, correct?
Correct. The variance request is to reduce the lot width at the front yard setback.
Okay, that was my understanding. I wanted to be abundantly clear. One other question for you, Ms. Hanson. The shoreland regulations say that there must be 100-foot width at the front yard setback. The city regulations say there must be a 300-foot width at the front yard setback. And the variance is required because the city regulations are not being met, even though the shoreline regulations are being met, correct?
Correct.
If I look at the lot width at the right-of-way, it's the exact opposite. The shoreland regulations is a little bit more forgiving is a little bit more restrictive than the city. The city only requires 50 feet on the right-of-way. The shoreland regulations requires 100 feet. Theoretically, if this change were to change the lot width at the right-of-way to the point that it was 75 feet, would the individual be required to get a variance from the city because it was no longer in compliance with shoreland regulations, even though it still met city code?
Yes.
So if either one of these are not met, a variance is required. Whether it's shoreland regulation or city code, we need a variance if either one is not met.
Correct.
Thank you very much for clearing that up for me. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all of my questions for now.
Quick question, Ms. Hanson, on the history of the 300 feet. Mm-hmm. Is that just a designation based on that zoning standard, or?
It is. It's for the rural residential district. So anything rural needs to be the 300 feet width.
And that's just standard. I mean, that's changed over the years, you said? Because you
No,
mentioned
I know back in the 70s when this plat was approved, it was 330 feet was the width, and sometime between there it was changed down to 300 feet.
Other question I had was, are you aware of any other properties that have variances similar to this in Andover?
Different situations. They're all their unique situations.
Okay. But there has been some
Yes.
variances in the past for
For
similar-
lot widths, correct.
width issues. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair. So Ms. Hanson, the R1 district is the surrounding lots in this area generally all that R1 as well, or?
Yeah, all of them are zoned R1. To the south, though, is urban development where the lots are smaller. And Joe, do you want to bring that up quick so we can at least show you this? But yeah, so in this entire area, it's all rural residential. And they're all pretty much the same lot sizes. But there you go. If you see directly to the south, it turns into urban lots.
The zoning, in your opinion, is correct for this general area where there's not really an interpretation that this could be something else from the zoning standpoint?
No, it meets the regulations for the R1 rural areas.
Kind of meets that
Yes.
intent of what that is looking for.
Yes.
Thank you for that.
Any further questions from commission members? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion. to open a public hearing?
I move to open a public hearing.
Second?
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? As you say, so we'll open up the public hearing. As our audience, you're more than welcome to come forward and voice your comments, concerns, questions that you may have of ourselves or of the applicant. I do ask for a few things, one of which is as you come forward, you do have to state your name and address for the record. I do ask that you go slowly so our recording secretary can get that information down. And then we do ask everybody gets one turn at the mic first go around, and then once everybody's had their chance, if you have a second question or comment that you want to come back to the mic, you're more than welcome to, but we do ask that everybody gets provided one opportunity first. I do ask also that you address us as the commission. Please don't address the audience or the applicant. We're the ones who are going to be making that recommendation, so please just address us. We also don't want it going back and forth between yourself and an audience member, please. Be respectful of each other and each other's comments. And also, this is just for the variance. We are not discussing the lot split, so if you have concerns regarding the lot split, that would have to be taken up by city staff if this is approved. We're just discussing the lot variance, that 180 and 150 feet, which you saw up on the overhead not too long ago. And just one final note is we are just a recommendation body. This will go before the city council probably in about a week or so. So with that being said, and I apologize, I know I'm lengthy with that, but with that being said, please feel free to come up and address us. Like I said, if you have questions, comments, or concerns. That will. I was going to say I usually ask if you can wait until everybody's had their opportunity, because sometimes we get questions and then we're going to ask you to come forward and then you're going to sit down and we're going to ask you to come forward again, and just to save yourself back and forth. So if you don't mind, we will ask you to come forward. I'm sure there's some questions from commission members, but I'll first look to the general public audience if there's anyone who wants to come forward. Yep. So again, just like I say, state your name and address for the record so she can record it, and then feel free to.
My name's Katie, Katie, last name Shaw, SHAW. I'm at 4050 147th Lane Northwest. I just asked that the commission take a look at the entire property areas of our neighbors, and the 300 feet of lot width creates an environment of space that 180 and 150 are a lot thinner. They might meet the square footage and the depth, but the distance between the properties is significant. I just ask you to consider that as you're considering this.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Appreciate it, Katie.
Hello. Tom Jordan, Jordan. I'm at 14800 Blackfoot Street, Northwest. And similar to what Katie just mentioned on the lot width, our concern is that the precedent this would set in the neighborhood. Currently, the value of the homes, a portion of the value of the homes, is based on the size of the lots and the land that surrounds them. It's very different than a urban subdivision as we have to the south of us. By starting to split the lots, we would see an increase in the density of homes in the area, because if one is granted, I would anticipate that many more will be requested. And it will change the character, the value of the homes, and the typical homes that are built today are nothing like the homes that are in the neighborhood today. So it will change the whole character and the feel of the neighborhood as well. Many of the people that moved into this area, moved there because there is space. We have lots of wildlife that goes through, and as you can see from all the wetlands that move through this area, and we start putting more homes and splitting lots, it will definitely change that and impact it seriously. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to address the commission? I guess then, in that case, I'll ask the applicant to come forward. And again, just for the record, if you can state your name and address, and I don't know if you have a formal presentation. Obviously, we had the presentation by staff, but if you had one of your own, feel free to do that as well.
My name is Lee Warneka. I live at 14791 Blackfoot Street Northwest, Andover, Minnesota. I think to a certain degree we're being misled. First of all, I talked to people who signed and didn't sign the petition, and they were led to believe that we were splitting our lot to something less than 2.5 acres. There are no 6-acre lots that I know of that would be able to split down to 3 acres like ours. So the panic about the subdivision all of a sudden being all split up and becoming reach out the window and shake your neighbor's hand from your house, that's just not correct. The other thing is, how do we get that? Is it on here? Oh, okay. Much has been made about the open area, and I think if you look closely, you'll see that from this shot alone, there will be quite a bit of open area here all the way around the curve because of the drainage ditch that comes through there to the lake. Now, I may not own that, but the metaphor here is that it's open area. Well, it's still open. It'll always be open. If you look at well, this is a shot of the drainage ditch itself. You can see it's for real. This is a picture coming from the west east towards the lot. And you can see the drainage ditch there. If you take a look at the open area, including the lot, it's like 400, I stepped it off, I came up with about 400 feet coming around the curve. So I don't think it's correct to say that all of a sudden we don't have open area, because there's actually going to be more open area there than between these two houses. This is a shot farther back. I think you can get an idea of how much open area there will be. This is my house here. This is the subject lot, or this will be lot B, the lot split, and then the drainage ditch is here. There'd be a tremendous amount of open area there. And I think that actually kind of covers it. My biggest point is that you are not setting a precedent. There will be 2.5 acre, actually more than 2.5 acre lots when it's split. And this is according to the Anoka County surveyor. Somebody had recommended I bring in a private surveyor to survey all the land that's high. Well, I think if you look on there, even in this picture, you can see there really is a nice, large building pad there. But if you look at all the lots in the subdivision, almost every one of them has some low parts, some substantial low parts with some of them. So how we get into that and how we get out of it, I have no idea. I defer to the expertise and the authority of Anoka County. And I think that about covers it. The other comments that I had to make, or you already have, and I won't belabor this by going through reading that. Is that yours? Thank you.
And Mr. Warneka, I apologize before you sit down. Sometimes our commission members do have questions of the applicant, so I apologize, but I'm going to stop you right there at the mic and turn to my fellow commission members and see if there's any questions from any of them. As I say,
Mr. Chair?
Commissioner Kohler?
Mr. Warneka, you produced a photo and said, look at the distance between these two houses. Where are those two houses located? Are they, presumably in your neighborhood?
Across the street. One of them is Tom Jordan house, who made the point about wanting open area. There's less open area between his house and the house next door than
I understand. I'm sorry, sir, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I understand the point that you were trying to make. I'm trying to figure out where on my map those houses are.
Right directly across the street from the subject.
And Commissioner Kohler, we will show it as well too on the.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Warneka.
Any other questions of the applicant?
There actually was one other point I'd like to make.
Yeah.
Also, much mention is made about the density. And yet, right next to Mr. Jordan, just kitty corner from us, is a single-family home that, through variance, was turned into a multifamily home duplex. I really took exception to that, but I didn't come here in mass. So I think there's a lot more to consider than the leap of faith that some of this is. I think if you look at the facts, you'll see this is an extremely desirable lot. I am so tired of builders approaching me about selling that lot. In addition, the city wanted to buy it. It just makes sense to do it. It wasn't really my idea to begin with.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else?
No.
Then Commissioner Kohler, you had a question about the picture he's shown.
Yes.
And Joe, if you want to zoom in on it. Joe will zoom in on it here for you. So I believe it is, yes, it's those two right there. So 14820.
And Joe, while you're there, sorry, Mr. Janish, while you're there, my apologies. Can you reference on this map the two-family duplex home? Do you know where that is?
I do not know where it is.
Right across the street.
4115? Okay. I assume we can go back and
We can look the
take a
records
look
on that.
what's registered with the city.
Yes, absolutely. I
understand
will,
it.
and I can let you know on that.
Thank you, Ms. Hanson. Appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Janish.
As I say, it is still a public hearing, so if anybody else wishes to come forward and address the commission. Again, just make sure to state your name and address for the recording secretary, please.
Hi, folks. My name is Ben Shaw. I'm at 4050 147th, just south of the subject property. I wasn't intending to speak tonight, but I just want to ask some questions for the record and for the commission. A lot's been made of the area, and I want to make sure I understand that clearly. Because I've got just a section of the plat that I was pulled from Anoka, and we had our lot surveyed. Can we show that? Oh. How do we do that?
Ms. Han, thank you.
Back to the camera? Yep. Okay. So I guess we're here on this property. I guess I just want to understand from what's on record, from a lot length of approximately 622 and an approximate width here in the center of 330. I'm not a mathematician, but in my mind, that when you do it, it's something like 4.7. So that's about what our lot size is. I'm not sure where the additional acreage comes from. I understand that out on Anoka's website, you can see things like this that show approximately 5.99 acres estimated. We have approximately 5 or so acres. But there is water and cattails here. So yeah, we own maybe 5 acres now. And cattails, as we all know, in Round Lake are expanding. At least from their frequently asked questions, they say the Anoka County Survey's Office does not calculate the acreage of a private property. However, an approximate acreage is listed. So I just want to make sure we're clear when we're talking about acreage. How do we know how much acreage is actually there? Because I'd like to know how much acreage I have at our property. This is a drainage and utility easement, but we have about the same dry spot in the back on our lot as well. That could be a future shoreland lot. Not that we would intend on doing that. We like the woods. We like to see the turkeys come through. We like to see the deer come through. There is, I think, as it was stated in the record, an essential character to the neighborhood. There's a reason my wife and I think most of the people we talk to in the neighborhood, moved to this neighborhood. This will change that character of the neighborhood.
Thank you.
Hi there.
Hi.
Heather Myers, 4115 147th Lane. And my residence is the one that's in question about the duplex. We actually don't have, it was an addition put on. It's like a mother-in-law suite. It's not a duplex. There's no outside entrance to the addition. So there is another similar property on the other side of the pond, just like ours, with a in-law suite as well. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification, Heather.
I'm Jordan. I don't know if I need to restate.
No, she's got it, so thank you.
Okay, as was mentioned earlier about being misled, I want to make sure you're not misled either. The 2 homes that were shown in the picture across the street, I live in one of those. The house next to us, from what I can tell, would actually be further away than what the split lot would be from Mr. Warneka's current home, where the other home would be. So there is more space there. Also, our property extends 600 plus feet from one property line around the corner to the other side. So my thought is that while we may not be asking for the same kind of variance of splitting below the 300-foot variance, we easily could look at keeping 2 separate 300-foot lots, and there's many of those in the neighborhood, while you would come with a variance for a smaller square footage, still having enough buildable to 10,000 plus 4,000 or so for a house footprint. So there are many ways that we could come with variances that would change. So there are a number of options besides just a 6-acre lot where you could see other variances being requested in this neighborhood, which I would hope did not happen. I do not want to see the neighborhood change in that way and see many, many more homes come in there. in various lots. As I walk through the neighborhood, you can see where there are many opportunities for home spaces to be put in there. However, we're all on septic. We're not on city sewer. We're all on wells. Just concerned about the density and everything that would happen with the land and the precedent that all this would set. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello again, Katie Shaw. I just wanted to address, there was mention that with the petition that neighbors were misled, and I just want to draw your attention to the wording on the petition, that it is about the feel and the potential for precedent, that I don't know anything about my neighbor's property and acreage. That's not what this petition was about, and that's not what it was advertised as. So I just wanted to make that apparent. As well, I don't have the picture, but the picture of how much open land there is between the Lot B. It wasn't my picture. I'm sorry. This one. Use this one. My neighbor used a picture. It was a real life picture taken from this direction, pointing here, showing that all of this open land would be here, but that's our land. That's not, that's open. That's not part of the land that he's talking about splitting up. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Hard to show. But.
This is all trees.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, Deborah Jordan, 14800 Blackfoot Street. I just wanted something clarified that Mr. Warneka said about being approached by builders and approached by the city, that the city wanted to buy that lot. And he did send us an email saying he felt that this would be approved as the city wants it. So I guess my question is the city trying to buy this lot? I'm a little confused. Who's, from his comment and the email we all got from him?
At this time, the city is not going to buy this lot, and we don't have any interest in it. I'm not sure what happened in the past when everything was Kelsey Park, and if there was some conversation back then. I can't attest to that, but I will talk to other staff and find out what it's all about.
So the city is not trying to purchase this?
No.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that.
No, city is not going to purchase this.
Anyone else wish to come forward before we close the public hearing? Again, just as a reminder, once we close the public hearing, unfortunately, you will not have an opportunity to address us as a commission body. It is our time to discuss things. So I'll throw it out there one more time. If anybody else wishes to address us, please come forward. Okay. Since nobody has addressed us, or nobody wants to come forward, pardon me, and address us, I will entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
I move to close the public hearing.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any questions? Obviously, this is our time to discuss things. Any points, recommendations?
Mr. Chair, may I ask a question of staff at this time?
Absolutely. Yep.
Ms. Hanson, or Mr. Janish, I'm not sure who I should direct this to. The point was raised that the county estimates acreage at 5.99, and the county is very clear that it's an estimate. I assume, and I'm looking for someone to confirm, that the city knows exactly what the acreage of that piece of property is.
We don't, and that's the issue on the resolution. If this was to be approved, in order for the lot split to move forward, Mr. Warneka would be required to have a licensed surveyor survey the property with the correct surveys showing that he has at least 2.5 acre minimums per lot.
So to follow up on that, the estimate is 5.99 because I'm not good with math either. We're going to say 6. And we're asking for 2.5 per lot. Well, if I have 2 lots at 2.5, that's 5. We're not even close to 6 yet. Is it fair to assume that, and again, it's an assumption until proven by a surveyor, is it fair to assume that we could get 2.5 acre lots out of this piece of property if the variance were granted for the front yard setback?
Yes, as long, again, as it's proven by the licensed surveyor. Yep.
Understood. That's all the questions I have at this time for staff.
That's fine. I was going to say, you're more than welcome to ask additional ones. Is there any other questions of staff? Go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chair. So we've had the last 2 meetings, we've had variances. So we have this list of practical difficulties that were, as the recommendation by, supposed to go through to see if the 4 items have been met. So number 2 on that list is one I had a question on. The plight of the property owner is due to circumstances unique to the property, not created by the landowner. So I'm wondering if you can maybe go through that in a little bit more detail. I see there is a bullet point on it in the staff recommendation or the staff report. But my question is a property owner, you're not necessarily guaranteed a right to split that property at some point in the future. So I'm just wondering what is unique about the property.
Well, and that's something that Mr. Warneka would have to prove to the Planning Commission and City Council. Again, I mean, this property, he did purchase it. It was an existing property. You know, the size is what the size is. With that, I just, I mean, the lot size, again, lot size and lot depth, it does exceed the requirements. However, that width is where it gets it again. These are lots of record. The size of it is what was in place back in 1977, not much different than what's in place right now for lots in the rural area.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Mr. Chair, could I make some comments to the other commission members?
Certainly.
Thank you. This, for the record, this is my second term, and this is one of the toughest things I've ever looked at in my life with this commission. The issue, there's a couple things I'm thinking. The issue of losing the open space. There's, and I'm looking specifically at the map between 4050, the Shaw's house, and Mr. Warneka's house. If Mr. Warneka wanted to tear down his house and rebuild it closer to the Shaw's house and keep it right on that same property, right where this new one would, the new proposed house would be, it's perfectly within his rights to do so. Without the lot split, he could move his house. I mean, if he had nothing else to do with his money, that open space issue isn't anything, it's perfectly within city code for that little narrow area without the lot split. By the same token, these rules as to what the lot should be defined and look like were put in place at the time these properties were purchased, and everybody was expecting to kind of play by the same rules. I bought into this neighborhood because the neighborhood looks this way. City code says it's going to stay this way. I have a certain expectation as a homeowner as to what I bought. Someone's not going to countermand the rules on me. I can go back and forth on this all day. There's easy ways to destroy the character of one person's property without even requesting the lot split. But by the same token, the lot split doesn't meet city code. I'm back and forth on it. I'm looking for input from other commission members, other thoughts, other ideas. My mind is not made up one way or another at this point.
I was going to say, so is there any additional comments or people, commission members want to do similar to Mr. Kohler, Commissioner Kohler?
Question of staff. Is this the timeline? Is this how things go? We seek the variance before we frankly know all the facts about whether or not there's sufficient land, sufficient area there. Further, we're talking about 180 and 150 foot numbers on the front. Are we certain of those numbers, or could those numbers change after the survey is completed? I mean, how, just timeline and how do we feel about those numbers? Are those numbers going to change?
Okay. First of all, I don't think the numbers would change. We could set those numbers, and those numbers would remain. It makes sense the way we measure out the lots that they would make good lots, you know, if it was to move forward. The reason why the variance came first is because it is expensive to go get surveys and, you know, soil borings and that sort of thing. And so what we've done is recommended that he come in through the variance. And what we've done in the resolution, if this variances were approved, that he would have to act within 1 year. Otherwise, this variance request or the approval would be denied. Would become void, really. They're working. Okay, but so that's what we've done. We don't want the resident to put forth all of that money to do borings and to do that sort of thing. To get denied with the variance is what it is. So this is the way that we decided to do it. Again, just condition the resolution saying that you have 1 year by the time that these variances are approved to get through your lot split process. And if he can't meet that requirement of the acreage, the variance goes away.
So follow up with acreage. Looks to me like these lines, and I don't know if that's actual or what. At what point does their lot end in the back?
That we aren't sure right now, and that's why they need to get the survey done.
Okay. So, I guess my question is how much of this is dirt and how much of this is lake? We don't know that answer until we get the survey.
Don't know that. We do know that on the, what would be the lot, the vacant lot, he does have a little bit over an acre of buildable upland.
There's sufficient high ground to build a site and put sewer and water in there.
Yes, with the septic and well. Yep.
And regardless of how other big the lot is, that is there.
Correct. And again, he would have to prove that it is buildable with the borings, and that's required throughout the city.
That's all I have. Thank you.
One more comment, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
There was a couple times I heard this tonight. If we approve this variance, the floodgates are open. Have there been other variances like this that we should consider? It is my opinion, a variance is a very unique thing. It's not following any rules at all. We're being asked to bend the rules because of XYZ. In no way, shape, or form should this be the floodgates are open for other variances, and in no way, shape, or form should we consider other variances in the past. We should be looking at this on the merits of the argument, because every single variance is different. They're not uniform. We can't compare a variance A to variance B. We may be able to talk about the spirit of the variance, but they're different. That's why they're variances. So just something to put out there as we're thinking about this.
Certainly. Thank you for the comment. Any additional comments? As you say, the next step is to see if there is enough of a recommendation to approve this, or if there's enough of a recommendation to deny it. So I guess in Chair Daninger's words, I kind of want to get a feel for where people are at for approving or denying this, and depending upon that, move forward.
Would you like to go straight to a motion, or you want to do a straw poll? I'll make a motion right now. I think I'm very close, but I think I know which way I'm leaning. Or if you'd like to do a straw poll, I'll defer to the chair.
I was going to say, let me kind of just pause for just a sec. You wanted to make a comment, Commissioner Peterson?
Well, I was going to put a motion on the table, see where it went, but I'll defer to Commissioner Kohler if he looks like he was called on first here. So
I'm about to become very popular or very unpopular.
I mean, I can go too if.
Story of my life. I would like to make a motion denying the variance as written by staff.
Okay, all those in favor of denying the variance?
We need a second.
Oh, pardon me.
Second.
Okay, so we have a, did you catch that, by the way? I apologize, I interrupted. So we have a motion and a second. So all those in favor of denying the variance signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Myself? So I guess it passes as a denial. Just to let you know, to the applicant, this is going before the City Council at which meeting?
This will be heard at the June 6th City Council meeting at 7 p.m.
Okay. So again, we are a recommendation body, so it is recommended to deny it. That will go to the City Council as a denial, and then they will weigh whether they will approve or stick with our denial or not. So just to let you know. I'm assuming most of you are here for this item. If you are here or here for something else, that's great. We obviously ask that you stay. If you are planning to leave, we just ask that you do it in a polite and quiet manner so we can continue with our meeting. So,
Mr. Chair, maybe just
Correct.
one thing. I think staff had requested some reasons to forward on to the council. Is that correct?
Yes.
I'll give the reason that I made the motion, and there's reasons on both sides, and I think this is very close, and I really hope City Council notes that statement that I just made. This is really close. The reason why is very simple. The rules were put in place for this neighborhood. Everybody bought property knowing what these rules are. Maybe they didn't, but those were the rules up front. And they had a certain expectation, and as a city, I think we're obligated to uphold that expectation. Certain variances are real easy to pass, and this one is right on that line. And I think there's too much impact to the neighborhood, not in terms of open space, but in terms of they expected the neighborhood to stay as it is within regulation. Let's put it this way, if there was enough room to have a 300-foot setback, of course split the lot, why not? But we don't have it. So I kind of went with what everybody entered into their arrangement buying their home, took into account what their understanding was. And I think that overrides this. This isn't, I can't come up with a reason to shoot that down. It's really close, though. It really is. We're talking about a setback. We're not talking about tiny lots. If there were tiny lots, this would be easy. This is not easy.
Thank you. Commissioner Peterson?
Yeah, so Mr. Chair, maybe to add on to the reason, at least from my standpoint, and you made the original motion, so I'll defer to you, but And looking at the practical difficulties test, there's 4 measures we're looking at, and if I'm a linear person, so if I'm going down those one by one, I think items 2 and items 3 were not met. The plight of the property owner is due to circumstances unique to the property. In my mind, that wasn't met. And then number 3 will not alter the essential character of the locality. In my mind, we received a petition that kind of spoke directly to the character of the locality and trying to keep the rural residential character of the area. So on my mind, 2 of the 4 measures were not met that we were supposed to look at under practical difficulties. Not sure if others agree to that, but at least from my mind, that was my reasoning for my vote.
Well, I was in the minority, so I'm just going to state that I know that circumstances change, and I guess I had a little different view than you did, Commissioner Peterson, but that's why we're allowed to vote, and yes. So I think...
Would you care to elaborate on that? Because I really am so close on the line. What did you...
You do realize, Commissioner Kohler, we have voted on this.
I know.
It was denied.
You know what? I really want City Council to hear what our rationale is.
Right, and I think they have. Here again, I feel that the property owner, what he has proposed, I know that here again, the variance, does it really change? I guess maybe I should jump ahead. Does it really change the essential character? Slightly. I don't think it changes it a lot. There is a buildable lot on it. It doesn't appear that economic considerations alone are constituting the practical difficulties. It doesn't appear to need to sell it. So those are kind of my reasonings, and I know and I appreciate everybody who's here tonight, but I know that we also have individuals who wrote in who said they are neutral or that they do not, either way, they can, they're not wanting it denied, they're not wanting it approved. So I feel, like I said, that I think that it, again, in the minority, but I felt that it should have been approved. But like I said, that's my take. So moving on, we'll go to the next item of business, which is the public hearing on a conditional use permit on the amendment, revised plan unit development for Andover Clock Tower Commons by Classic Construction. And we'll have a presentation by city staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Planning Commission members. This evening, it's actually a 2-part process for this particular project. The first is going to be the amendment through a conditional use permit of the planned unit development, so a CUP for the PUD. And what we're looking at here is originally the PUD was approved back in 2003 for this particular area, Clock Tower Commons. And it was subdivided into 5 lots with the requirements of some different type of architectural standards than what the city currently allows. So we looked at basically some stricter applications were applied in this particular area, and it was meant to be a commercial area. With this particular development in 2009, there was an amendment to the PUD which allowed for a 3/4 access to Crosstown, which is showing just south of this particular site here. In 2014, this particular site was converted from what has been referred to as a bank site over to a retail, trade, and service site. The property to the southwest of this in 2014 was also converted from a restaurant lot to a retail, trade, and service. Also allowed for an encroachment into the setback to Crosstown, so it basically did establish a 10-foot setback from the right-of-way of Crosstown. Tonight's request, as noted before, is in a 2-part process. The first part is to amend the PUD. The second part would be to replat this particular lot. As part of the PUD amendment, the applicant is proposing that Lot 1, Block 1 of this particular site would have roughly a 7,000 square foot building. The proposed Lot 2 would have a proposed 7,500 square foot retail trade building. This also would establish a 10-foot setback for the proposed Lot 2. So again, it would mimic the lot that is on the south side of that 3/4 access. That again was approved back in 2014 to allow for a 10-foot setback versus the 30-foot setback. This particular request this evening would also include a shared garbage enclosure. So basically the garbage enclosure would be built over the property line, and it's shown on the plans here, roughly in this location here. One of the lots meets all of our minimum standards. In the supplemental information that was provided this evening, I had made an error when I was looking at the zoning map on my wall, which actually all three of our maps have now been rectified. However, I had listed it meeting the minimum requirements, and technically the minimum requirements is a 200-foot lot width along the roadway. With this being a PUD, or the planned unit development, we do have flexibility within our standards. Staff is suggesting that we move forward with the 163 point, I think it's 7.4. That's a good memory. Moving forward with that dimension there. As we can see, there is a building that will fit on that particular site. This entire development has cross-access easements. It has cross-parking easements. So individuals would be able to park in different locations and utilize parking in those different spots. Within your packet, you have a location map. So this particular site is across the street from City Hall. City Hall is located here. We have the community center, or the YMCA, and this yellow parcel is the area that's being amended as part of the conditional use permit. This is the proposed structure that would be constructed on that. Also, as part of the supplemental information, there are some photos within the Clock Tower Commons area showing some of the different materials and the colors that are utilized within that building. So staff has indicated that this would be consistent with some of the architectural character in that particular area. Staff also included included the original planned unit development site layout for your review. Some of the resolutions that have been modified over the years. And I think with that, I've covered the items that I would like to cover at this particular point, unless the Planning Commission has specific questions of me.
Thank you, Mr. Janish, for that information. I'll turn to commission members for questions of city staff.
I have one, Mr. Chair.
Yep, go ahead, Commissioner Kohler.
Based on the error that you discovered later of the 200-foot compared to the 163.74, good memory, sir, are you looking for any type of amendment to be made to the resolutions as they are written in our packets?
We certainly can do that. As part of the resolution, I believe it notes the attached plans, so that would include that particular aspect of it, but it certainly doesn't hurt to make it known so that everybody's on the same page and aware that that's slightly different. So if something didn't occur in within the next year, if it becomes 5 years, somebody goes back, looks at it, and it's much more clear to staff. And it certainly won't raise future issues to the individual that would own that particular lot.
Thank you, Mr. Janish, for clarifying. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yep. Any additional questions of staff? Go ahead.
Question on the original 5 lot, is it all owned by the same owner, or each parcel of land is a separate owner, even though it's in a PUD?
Right. As the particular parcels have been carved off or platted, there is the possibility for individuals to own those. So they would acquire it, but they would be bound by the regulations that the city have established through the planned unit development. And, it doesn't necessarily say that if I own all 5 of them that I need to maintain ownership of all 5 of them. They would be able to move forward with selling those lots through a typical transaction, but the planned unit development establishes certain criteria that they need to abide by or they have to come before the Planning Commission and City Council for modifications to that planned unit development. So really the planned unit development establishes the zoning criteria for that area.
So the idea that a shared garbage, 2 different owners of 2 different lots, you agree to that when you buy the land, that we're going to share that garbage spot?
Correct.
For example.
Where you could potentially run into an issue is if they don't agree on the provider, but that's something that they would have to work between each other. I think actually as part of the commercial site plan, which has been submitted, if I remember correctly, I think there's space for 2 dumpsters in there, so there is the potential that technically you could have 2 different garbage haulers providing service to those individuals.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Janish, I had just a couple questions. I wonder if you can just go through specifically again what changed from the last time we saw this. It looks like the building size has been reduced from last time. I'm just thinking of the issues that came up before when we saw this. It was, is there enough parking? So I was wondering if the number of parking stalls changed in any way.
Right. And the parking is established based on the particular uses. And what the city had done back in 2014 by making that modification of what had been referred to as the bank site over to the retail trade service, basically, I think it was 11,000 square feet what was proposed on this entire lot. That has been downsized to about 7,000 square feet for this particular facility. And then I believe it's about 7,400 for this possible future building here. Now, our parking requirements are going to be based on the particular use of that property. So depending on what type of uses go into those facilities, we would do a calculation based on the number of parking stalls. So for example, if this were to become a daycare, then you would have 1 parking stall per 7 students based on past history. For the Foundation Hill, the city used 1 parking stall per 7 students or children, plus 1 parking stall per 3 classrooms, plus 1 parking stall per 250 square feet of office space. So that calculation would be ran as part of the commercial site plan and verify that. Now, some of the things that we would look at as well is as the uses come into that particular area, there is that cross parking. So it might be something looking at the particular rush hour of certain uses, for example. You may be looking for, let's say that it's I'm trying to think of something that has complete opposite hours here. We'll use the example of the daycare facility. You may have a rush in the morning for drop-off, a rush in the early evening for pickup, and a restaurant may have more of a rush after that pickup time. So you would look at possibly sharing that. Ultimately, there is an association that is managed out here, that's designed as part of the planned unit development. So if there's parking issues out there, that association would get together and start analyzing it. One of the other things that tend to occur is as different individuals acquire property, there may be restrictions placed on the property. So for example, if I am I'm going to throw it out there, I don't believe it would go here, but let's say I am a car dealership. I might purchase that, and everybody else agrees that they're not going to start up a car dealership on that particular property. So you may see some different uses to kind of capitalize on that market area versus several that might have some higher traffic generators.
I know that was one issue before, that in the evenings there's a parking shortage in this area because of the existing uses. I think it's one owner for the whole site, but we had talked about the shared uses, and so my question was about losing parking stalls, because there's probably right now there's capacity issues in the evening. But the building's smaller, so the requirements are less here, but it probably depends on what the uses end up being.
Correct, and that tends to be reviewed, or I should say that is reviewed as part of the commercial site plan.
I'll keep going then with my questions. So then the other two things, if I remember right, when we talked last time, one was about the trail along Crosstown Boulevard right in front of, looks like Block 2. Ms. Hanson may remember this. There were, I think it was at the city council level, whether who was going to pay for it or whether the trail was going to still get in there or be rebuilt. So that was my next question.
Right.
That's going to continue.
It is our understanding that that has been rectified. That was rectified, I think it was back in 2014.
And then and then the other piece that we had talked about a lot in 2014 was kind of the monument feature at Crosstown and Hanson. There's going to be some additional landscaping and signage, et cetera, that was put there. Is that still occurring, or is that when the other block is developed?
Right. As the other site develops, then they would move forward with that particular thing. So as the property to the southwest develops, then that's when that particular feature would be reviewed.
Was that part of a different PUD, or it was all one?
Right. It's all one planned unit development for those 5, potentially 6 lots in that particular area. And I believe the conversation that occurred back in 2014, and we do have some folks here that might be able to answer it as well, is to kind of hold off and see what type of building is constructed in that area to see how they can incorporate those different features. Where if it were to be constructed today, then you may not be able to maximize the potential use of those features.
Thank you for that. And that was what I was most curious about, was kind of at what point in this development process do some of those, I think, benefits to the community that make the area look nicer occur? Do we wait till the end when it's built out over X number of years, or is that a requirement when we start development here? But it sounds like what you're suggesting is we wait till the development occurs immediately adjacent to it versus these other blocks.
Right, that follows the conversation that occurred back in 2014, is to wait on those particular features.
Yeah.
Additional questions of staff by commission members?
I move to open a public hearing.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 I believe we have the applicant with us tonight, and I apologize, I don't know who the applicant is, but, I was going to say, I don't know if you have a formal presentation for us this evening? No? Okay. Is there questions of the applicant? I'm going to ask my fellow commission members. If there is, I will ask you to come forward. If there's not, I won't. Questions of the applicant? No? Okay. Is there anyone from the public audience who wishes to speak to the commission on this on this item, pardon me? Okay. I'll look for a motion to close.
I move to close the public hearing.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Mr. Chair, I want to apologize. I didn't give you a chance to ask questions of staff when I moved to open the public hearing.
That's okay. I was going to say we can ask questions of staff after the close of the public hearing. Yep. I was thinking more along the lines of the applicant, since he's public and not staff. So is there any further questions, comments about this recommendation?
If there are no further comments, I would recommend to approve the resolution as written, with probably some addendum or note added to it, and I will leave it to staff to wordsmith it, to reflect the change in distance from 200 feet to 163.74 feet on the one right-of-way frontage.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All righty, the motion passes. And this will be at which council meeting?
This will be heard at the May 16th City Council meeting.
Okay, thank you. Moving along, the next item is a public hearing on a preliminary plat for the same parcel of property, Andover Clock Tower Commons, second edition, by Classic Construction. I'll turn to city staff for presentation.
As noted earlier, this is a two-step process here, and with the amendment to the planned unit development, this would allow for the Planning Commission to potentially make a positive recommendation to the City Council. I do have, or I should mention within your packet, you should have a similar on the screen here identifying the proposed plat area along with the preliminary plat for review, which identifies that 163 feet for that particular lot. Based on the comments that the Planning Commission had made, staff would suggest after the public hearing to consider a positive recommendation to City Council for the replatting of this particular lot.
Alrighty. Anything further, Mr. Janish? No?
Not unless there's specific questions
Okay.
to the Planning Commission.
Very good, thank you. Commission members, any questions of staff? Then I'll entertain a motion.
I move to open a public hearing.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Alrighty, so we also have a public hearing on this item. Is there any questions of the applicant on the second portion of this public hearing regarding the preliminary plat? No? And again, opening it up to the public audience if there's anybody who wishes to address us regarding this item. I'm assuming not, so.
I move to close the public hearing.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Alrighty. So public hearing is closed. Comments or questions on this? Additional information, or does someone want to entertain a motion?
One question for staff.
Certainly, yeah.
I'm not sure where this lines up. The road that turns into the McDonald's there was put in 4 or 5 years ago or so. Have we changed the plot line or the plat since that, or what was does that correspond to the overall planning process, I guess?
Are you talking about the road that runs from Bluebird kind of southwest?
The one that was from Crosstown into the main area there.
The internal road.
Internal road off of Crosstown.
Yep, right there.
I believe it's this roadway right here that you'd be referencing.
Yep.
Yes.
Was that, I don't know, Ms. Hanson might be the only one that's been here long enough to remember what the thinking was on how that, are we changing the plot based on that road, or how did that?
Yeah, there'll be no changes to the alignment of that road. It's all staying the same. Yep.
Okay. So there was a certain plot structure in place when that road was put
Yes,
in.
there was. Yes.
Now we're modifying it from what they were thinking
Yes.
that road went in.
Yes.
Because in a perfect world, you could have went and put that road someplace else and met the guidelines of the 200 feet potentially.
Oh, you're
for the
referencing
lot.
the
You're
access.
correct. Yes.
Yeah, I'm assuming that, if you had a crystal ball and could say this is where it's all going to look,
Yes.
that you could have put the 200 feet, move the road a little bit and make it work. But the fact that that road is in there now is driving the
You're right.
smaller
The smaller lot.
area because the road's in there. Where the
Yes.
road wasn't there
Correct.
5-6 years ago.
Yep.
Correct.
Had more wiggle room. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, just for clarification, if memory serves, there was a building to be on the other side of that road along Crosstown, instead of the north side of that road, kind of, the south side of that road. So, yeah, that's why it was put where it was when we did the original platting. I was here for that. So, just for clarification, you are correct, Mr. Sims.
Any further questions of city staff?
I'm going to make a motion, Mr. Chair, and maybe before I do it, I know this relates maybe more to the last one, the PUD approval, but I've heard a lot about the traffic circulation in the parking lot here, and it doesn't relate to this item, more so the last one, but if anything can be done through the development process to kind of improve the circulation, both of vehicles and all the kids kind of running through the parking lots between McDonald's, gas station, Beef O'Brady's, et cetera, seems to be kind of an area of concern in our community. So I just want to pass that along to the council as they look at these items. But I do want to make a motion to approve this item as written.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Alrighty, the motion passes. This will be at...
This will also be heard at the May 16th City Council meeting.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Hanson. The next item is a public hearing to the City Code Amendment to Title 12, the zoning regulations, and Title 13, planning and development. I'll turn to city staff for a presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Due to our recent comprehensive plan amendment that was provided to the Met Council, we're required to have our zoning code in compliance with that comprehensive plan amendment. So this evening's item would be contingent upon the Met Council approving that comp plan amendment, which the city does not expect any issues with. The area that we're discussing is what's referred to as the rural reserve. It's kind of highlighted, or it is highlighted, depending on the resolution here, in an orangish, yellowish bordering area, and it does have some brownish or darker orange hashes through it. So this is the area that the city has referred to and identified within the comprehensive plan as the rural reserve. The intentions of tonight's zoning text amendment is to allow for individuals to continue to use their property how they have used it in the past. So when we take a look at the first couple sections or first couple items that are proposed this evening within Title 12, it's carrying forward how the city has regulated that property, I believe since 2002 or 2003 when it was originally established. Where the big changes come in is when an individual is looking at splitting their particular property within the rural reserve area. Today, without the comprehensive plan amendment being approved, an individual who owns 40 acres has the ability to create two 20-acre pieces. So our density is one home per 20 acres. With the comprehensive plan amendment, the city has requested, and we believe that the Met Council will approve, one home per 10 acres. So an individual would be able to split their 40 acres into four 10-acre pieces. Now, I mentioned down here on the bottom, this section 13-1B-6A. When you go to your zoning text, or proposed zoning text, you'll find that section all in red, highlighted yellow. And what that section states is that if an individual owns a quarter described by the rectangular survey coordinate system, as long as that quarter, when surveyed, has 35 acres or greater, they would be allowed to split that into four. They would be allowed to have 4 units on it. The purpose for that is that a quarter is not a true 40. You can have them when they're called short, they're under 40 acres, or long, they're over 40 acres. Most people hope when they survey they have a long one, but reality of the fact is you don't always run into that scenario. It can technically be short. So that particular section would allow an individual, again, as long as they have a quarter, 35 acres or greater, they'd be entitled to 4 units. This splitting process would also be a public process. So an individual looking at splitting property within the rural reserve would now have to go in front of the Planning Commission and the City Council. It also describes the process within the zoning ordinance. It includes going in front of the Andover Review Committee, which is ARC staff members. We would review the proposal based on comprehensive planning and our knowledge of the site. Within the ordinance, we have language that includes what staff's looking for and what the Planning Commission and Council will be looking for as they evaluate these particular splits. Most of that language comes from the lot splitting application that you can obtain out front or going on to our city application. So the majority of the information that city staff is looking for and has provided in this ordinance is the same information that anybody within the city who's looking at doing a lot split, such as the variance we received tonight, had they moved forward, they would have to obtain the same type of information. Something to keep in mind is when we approved or as we move forward with our comprehensive plan amendment, what we asked the Met Council is to deviate from the 10 acres. And what we asked for is to allow for individuals to split property down to 5 acres, but maintain that 1 in 10 density. What the Met Council has indicated, and there's a handout in the packet talking about flexible design guidelines and recommending to the city to create a tool when this occurs. So as individuals seek to split their property under 10 acres, the Met Council is indicating the city needs to utilize a tool to verify that these 5-acre parcels will not impact future urban development in this area. Some of those tools that they've identified in the handout include development agreements, easements, and tracking. So really the option would be, and there's language proposed in the packet related to each of those, where staff could have something as simple as an Excel spreadsheet and track the number of times that the property split and what the density is based on that particular property. To an easement, which would mean that an individual would have to utilize the legal description based off the survey and restrict future development on the remnant piece, saying that they're not going to develop that particular piece. And if they did, they would have to come before the Planning Commission City Council and enter into a easement agreement, encroachment agreement, saying we are now going to encroach into the easement to build a 30 by 40 shed for our agricultural activities. Then the city would potentially sign off on that. There's also the development agreement, which would be an agreement between the property owners and the city indicating that they are not going to develop that particular piece of property until certain triggers happen. These triggers were also included in the easement language, which includes zoning changes, comprehensive plan change, and also the ability or the possibility, I should say, also the city providing or bringing out utilities. So if a developer approached them, said, I would like to purchase 35 acres and I'm going to bring out city utilities, then that development agreement or that easement could be, so to speak, deleted off the property and they can move forward under urban densities. Some of the items where these particular discussions occur is when we take a look at items J and K within the proposed ordinance. And I'd like to note that for J and K, staff had used the word when applicable. And the intention of that term was meant when somebody splits under 10 acres in size. So staff would suggest to the Planning Commission to consider to change when applicable to something to the effect of when the applicant submits for under 10 acres or proposes lots under 10 acres in size. And then that would trigger J and K or some similar language for that. Now it's believed that a development agreement or tracking can handle the items of J and K. So I have some language here referred to as J1 and J2. With J1, I made a similar error, and it should probably say when applicable or when a parcel is split under 10 acres, remnant parcels shall restrict future development of homes through a development agreement with some additional language there. If we go with J2, staff shall track and monitor the splitting of parcels through an internal tracking process. So basically, we would have the ability to establish an Excel document and track which particular quarter has so many units coming out of it. And when an individual came in or exceeded the number of units, then we would say, we're sorry, but another split or another home on this would be inconsistent with the comprehensive plan. Something that the Met Council has indicated is through that brochure or the flyer that they had talks a little bit about ghost platting. And technically the way that the Met Council looks at it is if you are going over or developing more than 25% of a particular parcel, then we should be looking at ghost platting. As drafted this evening, I believe it's item N, indicates that all splits would require essentially a ghost platting or a sketch. So that's something that the Planning Commission will want to consider as this evening. Right now, item N is more restrictive than what the Met Council would require. If the Planning Commission desires to only require that when we're under 10 acres, staff would suggest utilizing some language similar to the previous items where when a parcel split under 10 acres, then sketch planning shall be provided. I've really highlighted the big things, and the items are related to the tool that the city would implement to monitor the splitting. Again, that can be as simple as tracking. That could be a temporary development agreement with particular triggers, which there is a draft sample version of that. Now, please keep in mind that those development agreements may be modified for a particular split, similar to how our development agreements are done for individuals that are splitting the property. So it might be, the language might change a little bit, but it would be something that would be brought forward as those splits are brought forward to the Planning Commission, City Council. And also to the other tool would be an easement, and that would strictly be an easement that would be placed over the remnant piece when a split is made under 10 acres in size. And that easement would require an individual to identify the area where an impact would be made. So essentially the way that, the easiest way to explain it is if I split a particular piece of property, we'll use the 35 acres and 5 acre example here on the tabletop. If I were to do that split, technically what the code would say is that you'd have to place an easement over that 35 acres. Now, if I'm farming that 35 acres and I decide that I'd like an agricultural building placed on that land, perhaps for produce or for maintenance of my equipment, I would now have to resurvey the 35 acres to identify the location and obtain a legal easement to determine where that building would be in order to enter into an agreement. So there's some additional restrictions and additional things that individuals would have to do to obtain that. Something to keep in mind is I'll put this map up again. Again, this language before you this evening will impact the area that's currently referred to as the rural residential or rural reserve, and it'll apply to all the properties within that area. I do have, again, the flexible residential development ordinance guidelines included in the packet. We have Title 12 related to the zoning districts, adding in language. We have the paragraph describing the purpose of each district. We've added the requirements for this particular district to our Excel spreadsheet, which is included in the code. That's all highlighted in red. The different uses, again, staff is not expecting an individual within the rural reserve area to notice changes, except for now if somebody calls for zoning, we're going to say that they're rural residential, because we've carried over what the R1 district, which has been kind of the regulating district of that particular property, over. So an individual should not notice, unless they're looking at splitting a particular piece of property, that something has changed out here. As we travel a little bit further, I'll just make note, when it came to Title 13, what staff did is we took the original language of the splitting lots, parcels, or tracts of land, split it into two, created a 1A and a 1B. 1A was modified to relate to other parts of the city. 1B was modified to relate to the rural reserve. And again, as you flip through, you can see that there's a lot of red as part of 1B, but it's because we're creating a new district. And I noted in here, the yellow sections are really the ones that staff is bringing to your attention. Otherwise, the items should be very similar to what's required of a typical split, with the exception of going through that public hearing process. It's my understanding that that public hearing process is meant to try to notify individuals within the rural reserve that somebody's looking at splitting the property, and how may that split potentially impact their property. Again, the Met Council has indicated that as part of this process, we need to review these splits to make sure that it's not negatively impacting future urban development. With that, I stand for any questions the Planning Commission may have.
Alrighty, thank you, Mr. Janish. I appreciate that. Questions of commission members to staff?
Question, Mr. Janish, around, so this only applies to the rural reserve area. Are we, does not apply to anything outside of that, just to get myself clear on?
That is correct. The only changes that we're making this evening are related to the rural reserve area.
Okay. So under the theory of we're changing the zoning of people that already own land in that area?
Not necessarily, because what occurs today is it's been regulated as a R1 with a rural reserve overlay, so to speak, based on what's in the comprehensive plan. And through this process, we are making our zoning code consistent with we're proposing to make the zoning code consistent with the comprehensive plan by changing that R1 with the regulations of the rural residential in the comp plan into one particular document. So if an individual comes in, instead of saying, here's the R1 regulations, and then go look at the comprehensive plan, we have the ability to say, here's the RR zoning regulations, and it's already consistent with the comp plan. So it makes it all in one document.
Okay. Thank you.
Additional questions? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to open the public hearing.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. As you say, I don't know if you wish, but you're more than welcome to address us as the commission on this item. This is a public hearing. And then I know you already heard it, but just for the record, please your name and address. Thank you.
Jake Packer, 3074 161st Avenue Northwest. Don't need to take up a bunch of your guys' time this evening. Just wanted to give you a little back history. We own 80 acres on the north section of the rural reserve there. It's been in the family for 80 years. I'm the one trying to build the house on the land. I'll be the fourth generation to build a house on it. So I guess our request is simple. Let's make it as less restrictive as possible. I know a couple options were mentioned tonight regarding, the easements, the deed restrictions, the tracking. From listening, it sounds like the tracking would be the least restrictive option. So I guess we'd ask that we go that route as far as the restrictions that would have to be placed on the property. You guys have any questions for us, we'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anyone else wish to address? Alrighty.
Move to close the public hearing.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Alrighty, discussions. I think we do need to discuss a few things. one of which is the wording as provided by city staff on items J and K under 13-1-B4. And additionally, on item number N, regarding wordsmithing, so to speak.
Well, on J and K, we've heard a number of times this when applicable is a little too vague. So the idea of changing that to some type of reference of the split being under 10 acres when the split results in a lot under 10 acres. I really don't want to be the guy wordsmithing this, but I think something along the lines of when the split results in any one lot being under 10 acres or something along those lines. Mr. Janish, is that in the spirit of what you had in mind? Is my language correct? Would you like to just be able to wordsmith that?
Yeah, I think what you're suggesting is very appropriate if that's the desire that the Planning Commission wants to move into by keeping items J and K within the ordinance. Would be a reference to when a split results in a lot under 10 acres, then a deed restriction placement of residential structures may be required. When a lot split results in a lot under 10 acres, an easement stating future roads, trails, city utilities, etc. may be located. It becomes a question, would we want to apply that similar language to item N, which would be when a lot split results in a lot under 10 acres, a sketch of how the lots can be further subdivided to allow for a higher urban density shall be required, or may be required. But shall.
I'm stopping at J and K right now.
Okay.
I think J and K to me is kind of the no-brainer. And if any of the commission members disagree, please speak up. Just listening to Mr. Packer's comments about being restrictive, I want to make sure that we're not painting ourselves into a corner, and I know I used that phrase with you before. I should probably be more specific. I want to make sure that the city also has flexibility going forward, as this is rural reserve, which basically means it is rural area reserved for future urban development. So we want to make sure we're doing this right. Is a sketch plan the best way to do that when we hit the situation called out in 13-1B-4-N? Anybody feel strongly one way or another? I don't think it's crazy restrictive. I'm just wondering if there's another methodology. We're talking about a pretty unique circumstance.
Question for Mr. Janish. The term when applicable, how is that determined, or how is Mr. Packer to determine he wants to move forward? How does he know which of these rules are in place that he has to follow?
That was the exact same question that was sent to me, and my response back is that staff's intentions are when a lot split occurs under 10 acres, that this would be required. And that's at the time the Met Council indicates when a split occurs under 10 acres, they want the city to have some sort of tool to prevent the potential negative impact of these splits occurring under 10 acres. And that's where staff is providing these different options. Which tool is appropriate for the city of Andover to utilize to potentially prevent that process? And that's why staff suggested to take the term when applicable and modify that to when a lot split results in a lot under 10 acres, then this is the time that it's applied. So it clarifies it. When is it appropriate? And as on the floor right now is when a lot split results in a lot under 10 acres. It clarifies it much better. So if an individual, if that is the language that the Planning Commission makes a recommendation to council on, when an individual looks at doing one of these three options, they would not have to, the top three options, they would not have to provide for items J or K. When they're trying to pursue one of the bottom three options, then they would have to provide for items J and K.
That's the exact language I'm trying to get rid of, because I agree with you. I think that's a little too vague.
Yeah, I'm just putting myself in Mr. Packer's shoes, and I'm like, well, how do I know how to move forward here? So I guess that'd be my feedback, is we need more clarity.
That's why I'm suggesting that we change when applicable to anything under 10 acres, as to just put a line in the sand as to what that is, because people have to know what they can and can't do.
Yeah, because then he's got a black and white decision point to say, I can move forward on.
Correct.
Knowing exactly what it says versus the way it's written here, where
understandable.
You can be in your office asking, what does this mean? And you'll be going back and forth without being clear. So where does the deed, you talked about putting an easement on and that kind of, is that buried in there too, or?
Right. When we take a look at item J, what we're looking at here is, there's going to be that easement that's going to be placed if adopted. There would be an easement put over the property indicating here's where you have potential roads, trails, city utilities, future park areas may be located on this particular area. And the surveying will provide that legal description, which then is recorded, and there's a cost for that. So the city would pass that cost on to the applicant. Item J is talking about identifying an area, saying that we're not going to have a particular home in this area to provide for the 1 in 10 requirement. So if an individual on the bottom splits off 5 acres, then they would identify another 5. It's kind of a repetitive process, because if we've already eliminated or kind of done that through item K, and we're requiring an individual to come through and say, I want to put a structure here, well, we would have a knowledge, and that's kind of where the tracking comes in, is no matter what option we choose, we're already going to be tracking the particular process. So if we eliminated J and K and kept with the tracking, that's kind of the least restrictive. But when we include J and K, we're still doing the tracking, but now we're having J and K as part of it as well. Does that make sense? So we're kind of duplicating some efforts and double and triple putting things on a particular piece of property. And the Met Council has identified we need a tool to modify it. And again, that could be tracking, development agreement, or an easement on that particular piece.
Okay, so I'm going to pose the question. I'm looking back at what you have in the recommendations, and staff would suggest the discussion between a blanket easement, temporary development agreement, or lot tracking as to ways in which to handle the splitting of the property within the rural reserve. This item could be modified to language such as, and you've already discussed, J1, and then J2 is staff shall track and monitor the splitting of parcels. So if we approve the language that you have drawn up in 13-1B-4, J and K, it's much more restrictive, because we're changing the when applicable to the lot size being under 10 acres, that they're going to have to do a deed. There's going to be a deed restriction, restricting placement of residential structures, etc. in J, and then also in K, an easement stating that future roads, trails, city utilities may be located on the remnant parcels would be also required.
Right, as drafted, it'd be the most restrictive. Now, in that section, when we look at item J1 and J2, that would replace items J and K. So if we went with a staff shall track and monitor the splitting of parcels through an internal tracking process, the way that I've tried to lay this out, and perhaps I didn't do necessarily the best job of it, is that J2 would swap out J and K. So we'd strictly do a tracking process of who's done what, where, and how much more eligibility do they have. And that would potentially take away the easement requirement or the development agreement. Or item J1, which is talking about the development agreement that defines certain triggers, that could also replace J and K as well, because that development agreement would be recorded against that particular property, and it becomes an agreement between all of the property owners and the city saying, here's what we're going to do, and then it's also assignable as well. So if an individual did the option of 35 acres and 5 acres, and they later sold the 35 acres to Jim down the road, Jim would basically take over that development agreement because it would be assigned to Jim, and now he's obligated to follow that contract. Where tracking would be an individual comes in and says, I'm looking at splitting this. We take a look at our Excel sheet and say, this has been done today. Here's what you have available in the future.
Okay. So does that change letter N as well then? Depending upon which one we adopt as J and K or J1 or J2, the sketch of how the lots can be further subdivided to allow for a higher urban residential density.
It may. That's
okay.
Up to the Planning Commission and the City Council. What the Met Council is looking at is what tool is being used to prevent these particular lot splits under 10 acres from potentially impacting future development. And a tool that could be used is that ghost platting. So really it's a matrix of questions that the Planning Commission has the ability to pick and choose from. Now that development agreement could potentially cover that ghost platting, or it might be something depending on what's being proposed. For example, if an individual chooses on the bottom middle here where you have 17.5, 5, 7.5, and 10, that's kind of an extreme example there. But maybe the Planning Commission wants flexibility to require that ghost platting when that particular split's occurring. Or if 2 5-acre pieces are split off, maybe you want to see ghost platting on that. It's really up to the Planning Commission to do that. We can certainly remove that language or we can leave it in. But I think we would want to specify at what time period. As it's written today, it means all splits within the rural reserve are required to do the ghost platting. So whether you're doing the 20 acres, the 10 acres, the 35 and 5, or any of those examples on the table here, that would require it. So I want the Planning Commission to be aware of that. And what the Met Council requires is when splitting under 10 acres, you need a tool. And that tool is up for the city to determine which one is the best option. And those tools are, really the the tracking, development agreement, or the easement.
Okay. Yep. I was going to say no. I'll open it for questions. I have a couple more to make, but I'll turn it to Commissioner Peterson.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Janish. So, with regard to the easements, one thing we heard several months ago was they want people to have kind of an overall plan for this rural reserve area, and in particular, we have roads that are around the perimeter that you want to line up, so that you have an intersection, four-way intersection. So you don't want to have it. You don't want to build a house somewhere where it'd be in the middle of a road coming in. So I just wonder if there's what the best tool is to make sure the utilities and the roads line up around the perimeter of the rural residential area. And I'm not sure I've got the know-how to say which one of them would be the best, whether it's easement or another way. But I think that's one thing that in my mind that is important for the city to think through is kind of lining up of some of the utilities and roads.
Yeah, and where that kind of comes into play is when we look at 13-1B-6, 13-1B-6, the review and recommendations. As part of the review process, it follows a very similar process as when an individual is looking at splitting their property into urban lots. So what we would do is we'd go to the Andover Review Committee, which is staff. They take a look at it, and what we're doing on the planning end, what engineering's doing on the engineering end, is they're comparing it to the plans that are out there. And the individual may go back and make some modifications to their concept, and then that would go to the Planning and Zoning Commission. And as we take a look at this, similar to other splits, the Planning Commission shall review the splits and indicate such recommendation shall consider land use, traffic control, zoning regulation, future developments, and conformance with the comprehensive development plan and any other criteria deemed pertinent by the Planning Commission. And then the Planning Commission would provide a recommendation to the City Council. It notes that the division of a lot may be recommended for approval, provided that such split is in conformance with the city comprehensive plan, does not interfere with orderly planning, is not contrary to the public interest, and does not nullify the intent of this chapter. Again, this is the same language that we have in our typical splitting language within the city. Then it goes to the City Council, and the City Council bases their decision on some of the same aspects as well. So there is that staff review based on the comprehensive plan. The staff report would be done up, given to the Planning Commission based on the comprehensive plan. Planning Commission would make a recommendation based on the comprehensive plan and zoning regulations, and that's forwarded to City Council. So if an individual is proposing a home in a roadway, what staff would do is say, hey, there's a flag here, they're proposing a home in the roadway or at a potential access point.
Just to follow up, so if I could sum up what you said here and make sure I've got it right, you're suggesting that in 13-1B6, there's language in there that covers the concern I'm trying to describe?
I believe so.
Where you wouldn't necessarily need an easement to to make sure the utilities and roads line up?
I believe so.
Okay.
But again, this is an ordinance for the Planning Commission and the City Council. I think through tracking and potentially the language that's here, we would have the ability to determine where those future roadways could go. Now, some of the internal aspects become a little more difficult without some sort of ghost platting.
Could you repeat that last sentence, please? What you just said? Sorry.
Steph, do you know that one?
What was it?
When it comes to the certain intersections within the county roadway system, or when we look at the comprehensive plan, we are looking at some of the major roadway connections through the city. Now, when you get into more of the internal developments, we're not necessarily saying that Bluebird Street is going to run in this alignment. That flexibility is left for the developer, and where that really comes into play is through some of the ghost platting. Now, the issues that we run into with the rural reserve is some of these pieces are so far out that we don't necessarily know how the surrounding properties may necessarily develop. So some of those internal roadways can be rather difficult to determine where they're going to be.
How is tracking a control? I mean, everything that you just described when you answered Commissioner Peterson, that sounds like a control. How is tracking in an Excel spreadsheet any form of control? We already have control under the points that you just made. How does someone, I'm genuinely asking, how does Met Council see tracking as a control mechanism?
Yeah, they've identified it as a tool because we're basing it on the number of units that are going into that particular area. So we're analyzing each split. So if an individual came in with a 5-acre today, we would go through that review process, we'd put a tally on the Excel spreadsheet. Somebody comes in 3 years later from now and wants to do another one, we go through that review process, we put another tally on the spreadsheet. So we know that this particular 40 has 2 units and they have 2 to go.
So the tracking basically becomes a control when we're looking at the aggregation of splits over time.
Correct.
Thank you. I was completely lost on that concept till you just explained it. Thank you.
Yep, thanks for asking the question.
Mr. Chair, one more question for staff, if you don't mind. Given all the controls that are in place, I'm using a bad word, given all of the review and recommendation pieces under 13-1B-6, what benefit do we get out of the blanket easement or the deed restriction? What's the reason to do that if we already have all these other pieces in place? From staff's perspective.
I guess it would be more control that the city would be placing over that property. For example, as I noted, if there's an easement, that individual's coming in with that particular placement of a potential building, that example that I provided on the 35 acres and the 5 acres.
Wouldn't that building still need to come before planning and zoning and city council before it was built if the easement wasn't there?
No, not if it's related to an agricultural type use.
Okay.
But what it would do is it would go through a staff review process to verify the location of it. So, tracking, I think we heard from the Packers talking a little about make it less restrictive, and tracking is that least restrictive option, where an easement is probably the most restrictive option. Then you have a development agreement that probably falls somewhere in the middle between those, but is probably pushing a little more, on the easement spectrum.
The problem that I'm having is that I got to think beyond just the Packers.
When you're talking deed restrictions and easements, that's only in the event that a lot split is less than 10 acres, yes? How is being presented here?
If we define when applicable as a lot split, a lot split, I need to flip back to that.
I understand what you're saying. But
yeah, when a lot split creates a lot under 10 acres, then that would be applicable.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's up to determination. My intent writing when applicable was when a lot's created under 10 acres. But, an email question I had today was, when does it apply? And that's when it became obvious to me that it's not apparent. So that's why I brought that suggestion up to the Planning Commission, so that individuals that are reviewing the code and applying, they know that line in the sand, so to speak.
Kind of circle back, if you have 4 10-acre lot splits, your checks and balances are internally in the review, internally, to make sure a building doesn't go where a proposed road would be or anything like that, right?
Right. That
So you're doing
process,
that without the easement.
within the rural reserve. Within the rural reserve, that particular request, because it's in the rural reserve, will certainly go before the Planning Commission and the City Council, and that's where some of those discussions would occur.
And again, that would be without the easement language.
Correct.
Yep.
So to clarify, then, somebody that's not in rural reserve, they've got 40 acres, they split it in 2, they can put their house anywhere they want.
I believe that the current splitting language outside only allows them to split so many ways, otherwise they need to come in and plat. So is it a total creation of 3 lots can occur through a lot split in other places?
Yes, and then otherwise it has to be platted.
Right. Where in the rural reserve, they wouldn't be platting those 410s. They'd be able to do it through a meets and bounds.
So I'm still confused. If J and K are stricken, are taken out, and we decide, for instance, as an example, I'm not proposing anything, I'm just saying as an example, J1, the remnant parcels shall restrict future development of homes through a development agreement, etc. That language in J1 states nothing about being under 10 acres. So I'm assuming that you have your until defined, and using your quotes, triggers are met. Because there isn't, again, the when applicable defined in that J1, the triggers are one of these events happening. It doesn't matter if it's 10 acres, 5, 4.
No, but as I sent out an email to the individual that raised the question this morning, I believe I also referenced J1, where we would add that similar language. When a lot is created under 10 acres, the remnant parcel shall restrict future development through the development agreement. So I apologize for that.
Okay, so that when applicable should be added to the beginning of J, well,
If that's chosen.
or changing of the wordage, but it should go in front of J1 and J2.
Correct.
So for instance, if we decide to use, again, just J1 as an example, under 10 acres, when the lot is under 10 acres in size, or resulting in a lot of under 10 acres, remnant parcels shall, et cetera. Okay.
Right.
I know which way I'm personally leaning towards, but
The straw poll thing, or?
yeah, I think that might be a good idea, Commissioner Sims. So how many are in favor of using, I guess, J and K? Okay. How many are in favor of using J1?
Tracking.
That's the remnant parcels shall restrict future developments of homes through a development agreement until defined triggers are met, such as urban services, et cetera, are available. The last option is J2, which is staff shall track and monitor the splitting of parcels through an internal tracking process.
That'd be I'm a fan of that. There's enough other language that and I think we're putting restriction on the people in rural reserve compared to people outside of rural reserve that doesn't seem fair by adding more restrictions to the rural reserve people.
Right. My only thought process with the triggers is that if something does happen, one of these items actually triggers them having to actually then do a future development. That was my only, rather than internal tracking. I guess I'm assuming if J1 with that language, would that have to come before us if a trigger happens? Because it appears I'm also kind of getting a little confused with J1. That's an external. That would come to us. J2 would be internal, which would mean it would just be city staff, correct?
Right, and technically what would occur is you're going to see it in the background. I think the development agreements tend to go to the city council, so the city council would see that development agreement. The planning commission may not necessarily. But as they move forward, if we're doing internal tracking, it'll be similar to our little brief background, even similar to the clock tower comments, how I said in 2003 this happened, 2009 and 2014. So you would see something very similar to that if you're seeing multiple requests that are occurring on a particular property.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, may I call out one point in J1?
Certainly.
The very last line, among other triggers as may be deemed appropriate by City Council. Translation, there's an out.
Right. And very good point, Commissioner Kohler.
That's why I lean a little bit towards that. It's not necessarily restrictive. It requires us to be thoughtful. I mean, if there's a good reason to do, I'm going to pick on you guys for a minute. If there's a good reason to do something further in the Packer land and they come to the city and go, this is what we want to do, we'll find another trigger and let them do it. But at least we have the opportunity to think about it and make a decision thoughtfully without putting the easement, without putting the, all of the really tough restrictions on them. It gives us, I know Mr. Sims hates it when I say this, the chance to kind of just use our common sense rather than something that's black and white in front of us. Sorry. But that's, if that line weren't in J1, I'd be against it.
However, I'm thinking, judging by what the consensus was, the motion is probably going to be more towards a J2. So if given the straw poll, I'll look to one of you three, I guess, to propose the language for this comprehensive, or this, code amendment.
Are we still talking about N, or are we still going to deal with N?
That would also...
Are you going to take everything in one motion, or are you going to take multiple motions?
No, I think I would prefer to do one motion, so maybe it's best, you bring up a good point, maybe it's best to get a straw poll also on letter N, because that may also guide us as to whether we want N to be included in this amendment.
Would N be a burden on the petitioner or the city?
Petitioner is what I believe you stated.
Right. The responsibility of developing that ghost plat would be the person who's applying. So their surveyor would put some things together.
I see it now at the opposite end of the page. My apologies. The applicant shall provide.
So how many would be in favor of having letter N be included in the code amendment?
I wouldn't be in favor of it, but I certainly think that it becomes a tool for the applicant to make a case. I think in many cases the applicant may want to do it. I don't know if we want to require it, but if you're trying to make a case that you want to build XYZ over here, well, here's why it fits. But do you want to require it? Good luck transcribing that noise.
When is the proposed language in N applicable? On a lot split less than 10 or anywhere?
As it's drafted, it's right now at any
Right
time.
now.
10.
Okay.
And that's why I brought that up as some discussion points for the Planning Commission. Is that appropriate or is that not appropriate? So it is possible, if the Planning Commission decided to, would be to use when a lot split occurs, creating a lot under 10 acres, or when the Planning Commission would like to see that type of information brought forward as part of an application, if they so desire.
So I guess the other proposal would be to leave in N, but stating resulting in a lot size of less than 10 acres, a sketch plan would be developed. That would be an option as well. This is going to get very interesting when somebody has to make a recommendation to this code amendment.
I have another question actually for staff. So with the way N is written, and assuming we tack on the when it results in under 10 acres, when a lot split results in a lot under 10 acres, N is not very specific as to whether that sketch needs to show the lot that's under 10 acres or the entire thing before the split. Did you have an intention either way? So to use your example that's on screen now, let's just take the far right one with the 2 5-acre lots. Are we talking about a sketch of the entire quarter there, the entire 40 by 40? Or are we talking about a sketch of just the 5-acre lots? What was the intention? I would assume it's the entire thing.
I kind of wrote it vague for the Planning Commission to have that conversation.
We need to have a chat about your vague writing. No, okay.
But how does...
I think, sorry. If I may, I think, when you start looking at the 5-acre particular piece, the option over on the right-hand side here, and now I realize that my 30 acres didn't show up on that particular last one. Really what we're looking for as part of, or what the city tends to look for as part of a ghost plat is, how are the roadways going to connect? Where is the potential for future development? What's the rough layout going to be for the particular parcel? So more than likely what you'd be looking at as, the language for this is probably going to be the remnant of a 5-acre piece that's being split up. More than likely is going to end up in some sort of cul-de-sac, depending on how it's laid out, or else they're just going to take those lot lines off the roadway coming in and just run them back. So they'll, on the particular 5 acres, on this particular 5 acres, if there's a roadway that comes in here, they're probably just going to run those lines back. On this particular one, they may come in with a cul-de-sac off the backside to try to service those, so then the backyards might be, up against the city or county roadway, depending on what's there.
So what you just described is the 2 5-acre pieces, but not the remnant. Correct? Okay.
That's correct. One of the other issues that we run into is currently our minimum standards for the R4 district, which is one of our urban ones. We're not meeting 3 units per acre with that today.
Could you repeat that? I had a hard time hearing you.
Our R4 standard, which is our urban developments, we're not hitting 3 lots per acre today.
Just from an overall planning, we wouldn't put 3 lots per acre in between these 5-acre lots, right?
Right.
That'd be mixed. We'd have a 5-acre lot next to, you wouldn't put, whatever that'd be, 3 times 3, you put 90 houses in between those 2 5-acre plots in that square, because you'd have a mix of 2 5 acres and then a bunch of urban.
Right, and that,
so that wouldn't plot anyway, right?
That's what kind of N is looking at, is do you want them to figure out how can the 5 acres redevelop or not at that 3 units per acre? And I guess, staff has had some discussions about this, but our current R4, which is our standard development, isn't at 3 units per acre today when you do your minimum.
But assuming somebody built a house on each of those 5 acres and that's established, and now I want to put 90 houses on the rest of it, wouldn't mesh, wouldn't meet your guys' planning guidelines anyway, right?
If city services are available.
5 acres butting up against urban?
Mm-hmm.
We have something similar to that on the street I live. We have a couple of urban lots, and then as you go down the street, they get bigger and bigger.
Okay.
It does work, in my opinion, but I do get the point you're making, and I do think it is something to consider.
I guess I'm going to chime in just a little bit. My only problem with these sketches has always been they become sketches, and if somebody doesn't sell, if the county decides to make a change, or the city makes a change to the road, then at what point do you go back to the person who's already done the sketch plan and things have now changed significantly? Do you tell them, well, things have changed significantly, now you have to redo it?
I haven't heard of anybody doing that, no.
Not if they're not applying for another split. There's no burden on them at that point.
Right, but I'm thinking if there is a lot south of them or north or east or west, depending upon how it's designed, if there's a change in how they have, how they, when they sell their lot, if there's a change in how they're envisioning it or how they're plotting it based on what the individual who has the 40 acres currently, or the 35 acres, or the 30 acres, if they have it a certain way, I just don't see all the pieces always meshing, and that for me is a hard stance to take to tell them, well, you have to design a sketch when, yeah, we have a master plan, but that master plan, A, can change, and B, is possibly ever changing depending upon who sells what, when, and what new roads or connections have to be done. That's where I have a little bit of a problem with letter N.
I agree with you. I don't know that you ever go back and ask someone to redo it if, they're not asking for anything from us. But I agree with you for the sole fact that these properties are so far out there. I mean, how far do you want that sketch to go? What happens when someone develops between that 40 and a much more well-developed, more well-established neighborhood, are they expected to take that sketch plan into account? What if they develop their own sketch plan? It could happen a month from the previous one. It doesn't even have to be that far out in the future. Again, I don't like that there as a requirement. I think it has a place where if somebody is trying to win an argument to be allowed to do whatever type of development, yeah, it may be a good idea to show a sketch plan if that's what helps you get where you want to be. A requirement by the city? I don't think so.
Right, and I think that should be, like I say, open. I agree with you, Commissioner Kohler. I don't want it to be restrictive because, again, I agree that this could be similar to Catcher's Creek, that it's just, it starts developing and things happen, and I can understand why you'd want a sketch and ghost plot to be done. But if, in this case, we're talking 30 years out, 40 years out, till the rest of this is developed beyond the Packers, their acreage, I just don't see it being a substantial, I don't see it being a good point or a good cost of fund or good cost and expense on the applicant's part.
I'm going to take a whack at a motion. I think we've discussed all the points. So, I don't know how I'm going to get this all in. If I miss something, call me on it, please. 13-1B-4J, strike it. 13-1B-4K, strike it. 13-1B-4-N, strike it. Include the J1 language from earlier on in the package. There's no page number, so I can't refer to it specifically. It reads, remnant parcels shall restrict future development of homes through a development agreement until defined triggers are met, such as urban services, ... down to the bottom where it says, among other triggers as may be deemed appropriate by City Council. And I strongly emphasize on that last line being there. That is the control that I believe meets Met Council's requirement, and we remove all the restrictions on folks looking to do what they want to do with their land through that language. Am I missing anything? If I'm missing anything, please let me know after a second in discussion.
I would second that if you were, as a friendly amendment, adding to the beginning of J1, resulting in a lot of under 10 acres.
Absolutely. That's a point I forgot. I will amend the motion to say J1 begins with when the split results in a lot totaling under 10 acres, totaling in size under 10 acres, or some such verbiage that I'll let staff wordsmith it. I think we're pretty clear on what I mean.
Okay, so I'll second that. Further discussion? All those in favor signify.
J1 is a development agreement then? That they have to, that's not a tracking spreadsheet?
Right, so I'm going to just...
It does restrict them because they have to sign a development agreement, correct?
It does state as part of J1, remnant parcels, again, resulting in a lot of under 10 acres, remnant parcels shall restrict future development of homes through a development agreement until defined triggers are met, such as urban services are available, rezoning of said parcel to a higher density, change in the comprehensive plan to a zoning district that would allow higher density, among other triggers as deemed appropriate by the City Council. So
I'm sorry.
That would be the language that would replace J and K.
It's that last line that gets me to buy off on J1, that there are other triggers. In other words, if you want to put something else on the property, knowing that this property is slated for urban development somewhere down the road, 20, 30, 40 years down the road, you basically need to come to City Hall and go, this is what I want to build. here's my reasoning, and we have the language in this to define that reasoning as a trigger to allow that building to take place. It gives us the opportunity to review, talk, discuss, et cetera, et cetera.
Don't we already have that with our existing processes?
Not necessarily, according to the question I asked Mr. Janish. They could put an agricultural building in the middle of a farm field, and we don't necessarily have that control. It wouldn't come before planning and zoning. It would go before an ARC committee or some other, they're defined in here. I'm sorry, I can't remember them.
You are correct, Mr. Kohler. Commissioner Kohler, it is the ARC.
Thank you. But it would not necessarily come to planning and zoning unless it met certain requirements.
My feedback is that we're still putting a restriction on them that we aren't putting on other people in other areas of the city, and that doesn't feel fair to me.
Okay. Well, as it's motioned, that would be, yes, is how it would be.
But that's the motion in front of us, so I guess that's my feedback before we vote, that doesn't feel fair that we're putting an extra burden on people that live in the rural reserve that we're not putting on other citizens in the city.
Okay. Any further comments?
So, yeah, one. Let's say you go down the tracking line, right? That tracking shows an aggregation of what's happened to that parcel over time. 10 years ago we did this, 4 years ago we did that, 3 years ago we did that. And that tracking gets entered into the discussion with ARC. That also is not burden that is enjoyed by other citizens of this city. So we have to have a tracking mechanism, we have to have a control mechanism in place.
Yep.
If the next point is to say, well, you'll use tracking, now you've put a control mechanism in place that other people don't have to follow outside the rural reserve. My lot split is not contingent on what happened 4, 5, 6 years ago. Now it is. Now we're looking at an aggregation of what the history of the splits were and whether or not this should be allowed. The whole point of this is this land is eventually designated for urban development, and we want to make sure that we're allowing development smartly. So whether you go with tracking or you go with, come on in here and tell me why you have a trigger to split this, it's still something that somebody outside the rural reserve does not have to deal with. I just think this one gives us a little bit more discussion to make sure that we're being thoughtful about the way to proceed in the future without putting the burdens of an easement to this or that on people. It's that last line that gets me. It's that, you want to build that because you got a fourth dog. Sure, that's a trigger. We can say that. We have some, and again, I don't mean to make light. That's certainly not a real, but we have that flexibility in this. No matter what, you're going to put something on people in the rural reserve that the rest of the city doesn't have, because that is the direction of Met Council if we're going to pass this to begin with. We have to have a control. The rest of the city doesn't get it.
Alrighty, so we've got a recommendation to approve, and I second it. So all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, so it would pass. It appears on a 3-2 vote. Did you get? Okay.
Mr. Chair, would you permit me one comment?
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you. I'm going to channel my inner Dean Denninger. A lot of times the things we say up here are to make sure City Council hears what we say, reads what we say, and takes those arguments into effect when they make their final decision.
Yep.
A lot of times a nay vote is to get someone to go, wait a minute, why'd that guy say no?
Yep.
So, in my humble opinion, this was ridiculously good discussion, and I'm hoping City Council takes a look at this and goes from there with all the points raised.
I would concur, and I was going to say, I obviously have agreed with your comments, Commissioner Kohler. I think I would prefer we take a medium approach. As much as the staff tracking is good, I really would prefer there to be some type of a little bit of a future development, something that we can see. And I want to obviously have them come before us and we can discuss, especially since we'll be looking at the comp plan. So I think it's the middle of the road. I don't think it puts extreme burden on those individuals in the rural reserve. I think it's a good approach myself. So, and this will be at which council meeting?
We're expecting June 6th. There is the potential that it may be on a work session between then and now.
Okay.
With the council as well, so.
Very good. Moving on, as Commissioner Kohler said, that was very fruitful discussion. Thank you for participating, and thank you for your comments as well to the audience who is here. I will move on to item number 7, other business.
All right, well, as you remember at the April 11th Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, you guys had before you the Catcher's Creek Second Edition revised plat with variance requests. At the May 2nd City Council meeting, the City Council did move with approval of the variances and of the revised plat. One thing that did change, though, is the developer did make a change to the plat. He did eliminate one of the variances in there with tweaking some of the lot lines. So, again, City Council did move forward with approving the preliminary plat and the variances. So, some other news, what's been going on. The Med Express Clinic that's located within the Walgreens on Bunker Lake Boulevard, that new entrance has been opened on the north side of the building. And they're now working on the interior finishes there. Shops at Andover, 13650 Hanson Boulevard. Joy Kitchen and Natural Nails are expected to receive their certificates of occupancy in May. And we also have a new tenant, Twin Cities Dental. Building permit application's been submitted, and the permit is pending right now to be picked up. So, the Andover Movie Theater, the CEC Theaters on Bunker Lake Boulevard, their building permit was issued to allow for the reseating of the theater. So the new theater seating is being installed right now. And then Estates at Arbor Oaks, that's the 3-story independent senior housing. The building exterior, rough interior finishes and floors are nearly complete, so they're moving right along with that. I believe they're pushing for a July opening on that. Acapulco Restaurant, they will be also opening a patio. So they came in and provided the information we needed, and that should be opening up sometime this month. So you can also have a margarita out on the patio. So as of the end of April, City of Andover has issued 42 new single-family building permits. And 1/3 of those new homes had a building valuation between $500,000 and $700,000, and that's not including the lot values. That's it, unless Mr. Janish has something to add.
No, go for it. I just wanted to I had a couple questions, but I'll turn to Commissioner Peterson first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know it's getting late here for everyone, but so at the last Planning Commission, the recommendation was denial on the variance requests. And I think the reason being that the lots that were configured the way they were it wasn't due to unique nature of the lots or the land. It was more so developer driven why their variances were needed versus some unique circumstance. Can you explain, and maybe we didn't have the full story either, but why the flip and kind of the rationale for going that direction?
I can certainly take a stab at that and certainly share the minutes once they're approved by council. But essentially what the council did is they took a look at the criteria for a variance and they analyzed it based on, is it a reasonable request? And one of the items that was brought up by the council was that, the lot that was along Prairie was about 1.2 I think it might have been 1.63 acres in size. So if an individual were to eliminate one of those lots, that 1.6 acre lot would actually become much larger because you had such a long distance going down there. So the council kind of one of the items that was brought up is how large of a lot does it become where it's not really economical to be on city services. If you have a 2 acre lot, does it make sense to have them on city water and sewer? So they were focusing, is it reasonable to modify the lot width at that front yard setback to allow for more units to be hooked into the system? And some of the things that they discussed is, well, where the building pad actually will be the 80 feet, so they're meeting it there. So they felt as though that it was an appropriate one. Now, the vote wasn't unanimous. I forget if it was a 3-2 or a 4-1 vote, and I can certainly bring that forward to Planning Commission members once that's done. But the council looked at it a little bit differently and, was looking at some different criteria when they approved that particular request.
Okay, good. Yeah, thanks for the feedback. That's certainly an angle that this committee didn't really delve into
right
in our discussion. So I appreciate that.
Yep.
And I just had a couple questions, but okay. And I'll make them quick because I know it's getting late as well. I had read the city council minutes, and according to City Administrator Dickinson, it appears that we have a goal of 50 lots to be sold. Is that, I know Councilmember Knight had stated it appears that we're on task, or right now it appears that we're going to hit 100 lots for the year, but I believe the goal per the planning that was done back last year, you're hoping to get 50 lots. Was that?
Perhaps what was being referenced in that particular item is based on the budget. They may have used that number for the budget of 50.
Okay. Okay, I was just curious, given that we are at 42, kind of what the projection was for the city, so. We used to receive, and I'm going to pick on you, Dan, I apologize, but we used to receive a code enforcement on a quarterly basis. And I know with the staff turnover, that's probably, it's not fair to pick or ask about it, but I was just kind of curious if we're going to receive that again in the near future, or if this is actually not going to be done anymore.
We'll put it together. If the Planning Commission had value in it, we certainly can put that together for the Planning Commission.
Okay, because I think it was sent out on a quarterly basis to ourselves and to the City Council as well, and some internal staff members too. So at least I personally found it to be interesting just to see what code violations are going on in the city and kind of where those code violations are occurring primarily and what happens to them. So at least from my perspective, I'm not going to speak for anyone else, but from my perspective, I found it to be a valuable tool. So.
Mr. Chair, if you're done, I have two very quick points. If you're finished. Mm-hmm. One, code violations are, in my opinion, absolutely critical because it's some of the things that go through our head as we look at neighborhood planning. Where could these violations occur? What are things that may be an issue going forward? So, yeah, it's critical to our thought process as we look at things from my perspective. Two, FunFest is coming up. Will there be opportunities for planning and zoning to staff a booth for a while or things like that? Thought I'd just ask because I will not be at the next planning and zoning meeting.
Okay, I'm assuming there will be, and we'll get that information out to you.
Sounds good. Thank you. With that, I'll make a motion to close the meeting unless someone else has a question.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.